I guess I'll start. Welcome to everyone joining us this evening. My name is Chantal Bellil. I'm the college's Deputy Registrar. A housekeeping item before I start, just to let everyone know that on the left-hand, bottom left of your screen, there's a language selector. So as you know, we'll be presenting both in English and in French. If you select floor, that will be the language that you will listen to, the language that we're speaking in. If you wish to choose, you can choose option of French or English or sign language. And so the left bottom corner of your screen. So welcome to the Ontario College of Teachers webinar to discuss our most recent professional advisory on professional boundaries. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that at the college, the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Métis, and the Mississauga of the New Credit First Nation. There's no doubt that navigating this global pandemic has changed the way we live, work, and learn. À toutes les personnes certifiées par l'ordre ici ce soir, merci.
For all those who are with us tonight, thank you very much for your flexibility, because you have been very courageous in addressing all the challenges. Thank you for your commitment, for your dedication. And we know that you have been very helping in ensuring a continuity of education. Your contributions are very important and we appreciate them. We also know that parents and families had to struggle with balancing the new roles they had at home. We know that it wasn't always very easy and that your life has changed, and you showed a real resilience. And it's the same thing for teachers who had to sail in a completely different environment, and you really managed to adapt to this new reality.
To living online, our residences became a hybrid space of home offices and schools. Our physical spaces changed and blurred as we adapted to the rules and restrictions imposed by this global pandemic. It is critical to note that while learning now occurs in personal spaces like our homes, educators must still be aware of and maintain their professional boundaries in their daily practice. This information is as important for parents as for educators, so that we all know what to look for if boundaries are crossed. The Ontario College of Teachers exists to safeguard students by regulating Ontario's teaching profession. By law, the college has a duty to provide for the ongoing education of all of our 230,000 teaching profession licensees. Before beginning today's panel discussion, I would like to briefly review the development process of a professional advisory. It is extensive. The topic is determined through research and consultation with our licensees as well as members of the public. Extensive research is conducted before the advisory is written. From there, each draft is rigorously reviewed and edited in an effort to get content and tone just right. We ensure content experts and critical readers examine the document for accuracy. The advisory is then reviewed and approved for publication by our governing council. Providing for the ongoing education of Ontario teaching profession licensees is central to our mandate. The Advice in Professional Advisories creates a baseline of information for self-reflection and professional dialogue. It also identifies legal and disciplinary considerations and has the underpinning of Ontario's high ethical and practice standards for teaching. Moreover, it provides a series of helpful questions that educators can ask themselves about what they know about professional boundaries and how to learn more. À qui s'adresse cette recommandation professionnelle? Qui doit y prêter attention?
Is this advisory for? Who should pay attention to it? Well, actually everybody, all the certified and qualified staff in schools run with public funding, and also all staff working in private and independent schools, member of the college. It's always educators that have the first and foremost responsibility to define and maintain professional boundaries. This is why this is a very important discussion. And tonight we have the Register and Chief Executive Officer, Derek Heim, who will outline the professional advisory on professional boundaries for certified teachers in Ontario. Of Ontario. Then we will have a roundtable with experts and a Q&A sections. Please send all your questions to outreach@oct.ca. And now, without further ado, I would like Derek to explain about the college's advisory on professional boundaries.
Before we do a deep dive in the advisory, I'd like to set the stage for our evening by sharing this video with you.
Did you know that in Ontario, teaching is a regulated profession, much like doctors, nurses, and lawyers? The Ontario College of Teachers regulates the teaching profession in the public interest. They set the standards for initial and ongoing teacher education, issue licenses, and on the rare occasion there are concerns about a member, investigate and hear those concerns. The college also provides advice to educators in the form of professional advisories, including this one, which focuses on the importance of maintaining professional boundaries. The advisory clarifies what constitutes responsible conduct in an ethical, professional, and lawful way. All Ontario certified teachers, from consultants and principals to directors of education and those working in non-school board positions, are affected. The advice gives educators guidance on the boundaries in their daily practice, in school and in the community, all the time. Boundaries are defined as the verbal, physical, emotional, and social distance that an educator must maintain to ensure structure, security, and predictability in all learning environments. The advisory provides several examples of boundary violations, such as using language with students that is suggestive, joking about sexual or racial matters, or physical contact like hugging or tickling. A framework for action and self-reflection is included so that educators can recognize and report as required. The advice is practical and should be read in conjunction with the college's advice on the use of electronic communication and social media, the duty to report child neglect or abuse, and professional misconduct of a sexual nature. Professional educators juggle multiple roles as colleagues, parents, and community members. OCT should never assume that conduct that is not specifically prohibited is acceptable. When in doubt, they should consult with a supervisor. Educators that live and work in rural or remote communities and religious or cultural centers may need to consider alternative approaches to maintain professional boundaries. These are also detailed within the college's advice. Setting and maintaining professional boundaries is an ongoing professional obligation, regardless of where you are. And the onus to set and maintain boundaries always rests with the educator. By developing an understanding of the ethics governing your practice and professional behavior, you can be more aware of both your colleagues and own actions. For more information, read the full professional advisory at oct.ca.
A short amount of time. So in the next little bit, we will explore what it all means. Let's start with why. Why is the topic of professional boundaries so critical for educators to understand and for parents to be aware of? It is because teachers and students have a unique dynamic. How, you might ask? They are in close proximity and spend a lot of time together. Teachers must work closely with students to assess and address individual learning needs. There's an imbalance of power because educators are in a position of authority over their students. Students are also younger and their ages make them vulnerable. Our learning environments, especially in the time of COVID-19, have blurred. Online and hybrid learning have turned our homes into classrooms. Educators may also have multiple roles in their communities, for example, as a Little League coach. So, what are boundaries? It is the verbal, physical, and emotional distances that educators must maintain to ensure structure, security, and predictability in an educational environment. In short, it is the boundaries we, as educators, must set and keep to safeguard student learning and well-being. The college subscribes to the National Association of State Directors of Teacher Education and Certification, a respected clearinghouse for disciplinary decisions affecting educators. NASDAQ defines boundaries as the verbal, physical, emotional, and social distances that an educator must maintain in order to ensure structure, security, and predictability in an educational environment. There are different types of boundary, blurs, or violations, but the most common ones include communication. For example, using an unprofessional tone, telling inappropriate jokes, making comments that are racist or sexual, using language that isn't appropriate for the age group, or simply being too casual. Physical is another. This includes staring at a student's body and touching. Examples of touching include hugging, kissing, tickling, massaging, pushing, hitting, or shoving a student. There's also the emotional boundary, which includes giving preferential treatment, encouraging emotional dependency that could be used to develop an inappropriate romantic or sexual relationship, or being a friend or confidant instead of being an educator. Next, we have relationships. These are the obvious ones, such as flirting or expressing romantic feelings towards students. Also included are meeting students alone and outside of school or without an educational context, and or knowledge of a supervisor or parents, such as going for a coffee or attending a social event. Technology is a tricky one, as many of us are working online. Communicate only through your employer's approved digital platform and ensure all content is student appropriate and at appropriate times. Avoid using personal emails, texts, messaging, and social media accounts. And finally, I'd like to address financial boundaries. This includes singling out students by giving them money or gifts in a preferential manner. It is extremely important to note that there are many other types of boundary violations. Neither this list nor the advisory itself covers everything. I will underscore the fact that the vast majority of Ontario certified teachers are good, caring educators. Others, rare as they may be, are in fact grooming students for a future sexual relationship. Grooming is conscious, deliberate, and requires careful planning. It requires manipulating the perception of students, parents, and caregivers to gain access to the victim. It is also gradual, so that it normalizes and numbs inappropriate behavior, so that a child is less likely to talk about it and less likely to be believed if they do talk about it. It can also begin innocently enough if a teacher is conflicted about their role and puts their needs ahead of a student well-being. The hallmarks of grooming behavior are the boundary violations we have discussed previously, such as interacting on personal social media accounts with students, non-employer approved meetings with students outside of school, showing favoritism, giving gifts, physical contact with students, and more. These national statistics on child abuse are from the Canadian Centre for Child Protection and cover the time between 1997 to 2017. These numbers are significant because every number represents a victim, a child victim of sexual abuse. One case is one too many. The numbers are also significant because they are consistent. There are more victims than there are offenders. On top of this, the vast majority were certified teachers. The majority of victims were also female, and as they get older, their likelihood of victimization increases. Note that grooming occurred in 70% of these cases. The types of boundaries and examples we just looked at range from clearly defined breaches that go against good judgment, such as a romantic relationship, to ones that are less obvious and blurred. A blurred boundary can be something as simple as a new teacher, closer in age to their students, mistakenly seeing their students as peers with similar interests in musical tastes, for example. That closeness can lead to risky conduct, such as providing extra or added individual attention. Do you see how a situation like that can blur the boundary, even with good intent? But the bottom line is that student safety and well-being trump an educator's intent. The impact of an educator's behavior on students is key. The onus is always on the educator to set and maintain boundaries. The Ontario College of Teachers has zero tolerance for sexual abuse. Those found guilty of professional misconduct of sexual abuse will lose their license to teach. Other forms of professional misconduct are also grounds for discipline. And now that we've taken a closer look at boundaries and the slippery slope that comes with crossing them, let's look at what we as educators should be doing to maintain those boundaries. The good news is that the advisory itself, again, available at oct.ca, provides educators with a framework for action and self-reflection. Recognize a potential problem or issue and gather facts and evidence. Review and assess what you know about the situation and the context, and ask whether there is more you need to know. There's much more in the actual advisory itself, so again, I encourage everyone to read it carefully. It is also important to report. If you see or suspect any cases of boundary violations, please report it. All Ontario certified teachers have a legal duty to report. And finally, reflect. Are you aware of the boundaries? Have you fulfilled your professional obligations? Do you need help? Resources? Have you stopped to consider your actions? There are 26 questions grouped under the headings you see here in the advisory itself. Please do take a closer look. We invite you to discuss those questions with your colleagues as part of your professional learning activities. Professional boundaries define the professionalism of all Ontario certified teachers. As a profession, we must have greater self-awareness, be sensitive to not overstep our roles, exercise good judgment, and use common sense. We must also be transparent in our actions. This is key. Do you have consent from parents and guardians? Are others aware of your actions? And finally, I would like to refer you to some additional resources. Read this advisory in conjunction with a few of our other advisories, including the use of electronic communication and social media, the duty to report child neglect and abuse, and professional misconduct of a sexual nature. And finally, please check with your employer for workplace practices and policies. There is a wealth of information there that will prove useful. And now, I would like to introduce our panelists for tonight's discussion. First up, we have Noni Klassen, Director of Education with the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. Welcome, Noni. We also thank you, great. Did a little bit of a lag there. We also have Lena Andrews, Superintendent of Education from the Hastings and Prince Edward District School Board. Welcome, Lena.
Good evening, thank you.
And finally, we have Linda Lacroix, the college's Director of Investigations and Hearings. Welcome, Linda. Noni, Lena, and Linda each have their own insights and expertise on professional boundaries. Together, they will provide us with a comprehensive view and understanding of professional boundaries, how they impact students, and what the repercussions are for boundary violations. Questions for our panelists can be submitted to outreach@oct.ca. We have received a number of questions already. So let us begin. The first question is, the statistics we showed earlier appear quite low. Fewer than 1,000 teachers were involved. Why are professional boundaries really such an important focus? Noni, maybe you can start us off?
Sure. Thanks, Derek. Yeah, professional boundaries are really critical. It really is the way that we enhance safety in schools and prevent harm to children and prevent abuse from happening. So it's really an opportunity for prevention. And that's why they play such a critical role in us focusing on them from a safety perspective. They're also something that are super critical to enhancing healthy relationships between teachers and students, and school personnel and students. And schools play such a critical role in the lives of children. As, you know, they really are the caring adults for children and the protection for children outside of their homes. So spending the time and having these conversations and really providing some guidance is really important. I think the other consideration is that children don't disclose typically. We know that this type of situation, these types of incidents of child sexual abuse or misconduct are the least likely to be reported. So that when we're looking at cases where we have, it might seem like, oh, we have under 1,000 cases. In that time frame, we had 1,300 students identified as being victimized by school personnel, which has incredibly devastating impacts on those children, their families, and the community. So we also know, based on the fact that kids don't report, and it is the most underreported crime, less than 10% reported, that we are significantly looking at a much higher number in reality. So it's really, I think this conversation today is really important, and super happy to be part of it.
Thank you, Noni. Perhaps Linda, you could add to that a little bit?
Absolutely. One student is one victim too many, because the impacts on students can be significant, traumatic, and long-lasting. The college has the mandate to protect student safety. This requires that we take all allegations of professional misconduct seriously, and this includes the boundary violations. I would also add that in our public protection role, that requires us to deal with allegations in a thorough and decisive manner, but it also extends to using every available tool to prevent incidents from occurring in the first place, hence this advisory on professional boundaries. So it's important to know as well, boundary violations, that blurring of the lines, can be a precursor to much more serious professional misconduct. So it's very important that it's addressed appropriately from a preventative standpoint.
Thank you, Linda. And Lena, from your perspective, please.
Sure, and to echo some of the things my colleagues have said as well. Professional boundaries are important because education is such a critical component to society and to the development of our children. It's really important because our teachers are caring adults in the lives of our students. The boundaries respect contract roles, the appropriate working hours, and the location of the learning environment. As educators, we're bound to the ethical standards of care and must always uphold the respect, trust, and integrity we see throughout the college's work and the work that we do in whatever our role, wherever we are working in education and whenever we work and support students. I think Noni mentioned about relationships and teaching our students. It is the relationships that really are critically important. Our teachers instruct in the classroom for sure, but they coach, they direct plays, they hold fundraising events, and often there are community members as well. And how we interact, support, guide, and learn with students is really critical to their safety, to their well-being, and to their development, which is a key function of school. So it does behoove us as educators to be role models, as Noni said, for healthy adult-child relationships in society.
Thank you, Lena. And while you've got the floor, I'm going to ask you to field the next question also. Many teachers do go above and beyond. As an educator, how can I tell the difference between dedication and crossing professional boundaries? Essentially, how do you strike a balance between professionalism and approachability?
Sure, Derek. I'm really happy to see the first part of this question, acknowledging the work that our teachers do in schools. They are teachers of the Ontario curriculum who facilitate learning, assess learning, and report on it on an ongoing basis. But they are the caring adults in the lives of our students. They support students in so many ways above and beyond the classroom. And we'll get to that, I think, later on this evening. In all of the roles a teacher holds in their position of authority with students, I would say that transparency is truly one of the biggest considerations. From conferencing with students in an open room, a room that is a classroom and meant for learning, from connecting with a student on email during the school day and seeing their parent and or another colleague or administration, whatever the standard is for that school. Working to support their learning in after-school homework club, not online at night. All of this continues to model for our children what appropriate, accountable, and acceptable relationships with adults ought to be. Being approachable means setting the terms at the outset, letting students know how and when and where they can access that extra help, or what adults they can approach for the different types of support they're going to need. As a teacher, know your role as well, and the various other roles that are in our schools to support students, referring to the school nurse, for example, or the social worker, knowing when, for example, maybe in a secondary school, to bring in a guidance counselor or even administration in some cases. Our schools are truly teams, all members there to support our students, and no one employee ought ever to feel that they are the sole caring adult for a student.
Thank you so much, Lena. Linda, maybe you can answer this next question from the disciplinary aspect. What happens if a teacher inadvertently crosses a boundary? Do you have tips to provide teachers signs to look out for so that as a teacher, you can quickly adjust yourself whenever you think you are going beyond your professional boundary while teaching?
Well, the advice provided by the colleges really focuses on prevention. However, actions taken in response to the inadvertent crossing of boundaries would depend on the circumstances. For a member, the most appropriate advice would really come from the Federation representative. I would add, however, that members should always be prepared to direct conversations and lessons in a way that prevents any crossed boundaries. Don't hesitate to get a class back on track if you feel that an in-class conversation is headed towards an area where boundaries may be crossed. One more tip to consider, 3 key words that you'll find in the professional advisory: relationship, time, and space. And always reflect around those 3 words. Relationship, is the relationship consistent or consistently the same with all your students? Time, are the interactions taking place during the appropriate time, during school hours? And if not, is it transparent? As my colleague just said, do you have the consent of the parents, the principal aware, is aware, so forth and so on? Otherwise, that line can get blurred. So relationship, time, and the last one, space. Where is the interaction taking place? If not on school property, again, are we being transparent? Is everyone, all adults, very much aware of where this is taking place? And I'd also add a final piece of advice. If you realize maybe while you're reading this advisory that maybe you have a practice that you had the best intentions, no harm intended to student. Now you read it and you realize, I can see now how outside looking in, this may be misinterpreted. I encourage you to use the advisory as a tool to open that difficult conversation and be transparent. Maybe seek support from your Federation representative, and together you might decide to speak to your principal or supervisor just to explain what you're concerned about and to avoid this misinterpretation, and of course discontinue the practice if your gut tells you that maybe this could be misinterpreted. And if we have parents on the line, if you have concerns, it might be appropriate to speak to the member or the school's principal or even the college. The college intake staff are available to provide advice, and they'd be happy to assist with individual concerns and maybe help you unpack that.
Thanks, Linda. Lena, can you tell us, what do school boards do when a teacher crosses a boundary?
Certainly, Derek. Well, all school boards have their own processes, certainly for investigations of all types. All investigations and that of instances where there is an allegation of a teacher crossing those professional boundaries really depends on the nature and the degree of the situation and on the details of the complaint itself. There can be anywhere from a school-based investigation involving the administration and the teacher, Or there can be situations where we do remove a teacher from the classroom and they are placed under investigation. Of course, we also work with our community partners, all boards do, in child protection and in police services. We work with them collaboratively to support the best outcome for the child and for the employee as well. Of course, we are mandated by the Ontario College of Teachers to report and certainly cooperate with any ensuing investigation on the college's part. I would say for everyone that all allegations of professional misconduct are taken very seriously and follow a process of investigation that certainly respects all involved. And communication with parents is critical to what we do as well. I would say overall, the best prevention is education, and that is what we do. As boards, we work with our school leaders to ensure that there is ongoing review of not only college expectations, but board and provincial codes of conduct and various advisories in place as well. I think we got to remember that our teachers want in the best way they can to support students. And I think, Derek, you said that at the outset, the majority, most of our teachers are those people that want our kids to succeed in school and in life and do everything that they can to help them do that. They have to be sure that they understand how these lines how the lines of these boundaries, can be crossed, and that knowledge is critical to have. Again, helping teachers to understand the importance, and I've said it, and I know Linda said it again, transparent relationships with students. And always being in the proper space and time in their role. It's an ongoing priority, and it's an ongoing education that is the responsibility of boards to do.
Thank you, Lena. And Noni, I'm going to direct this next question to you. A number of our participants did ask this question. How do you suggest parents talk to their kids about boundaries, especially the very young?
Well, I think that it's, it really is similar in terms of that we're focusing on behavior. So even as we're talking about with the staff, we're talking about behavior that's appropriate or inappropriate and giving them a standard of measure for what fits within the context of their relationship with kids. With really starting really young with kids, we have to talk to them about the importance of boundaries and what that means. What are their limits in terms of them understanding what they're okay with, what they're not okay with, and then taking that to actually what is safe behavior in relationships and what is unsafe behavior in relationships and what's okay in a relationship with someone and what's not. And so when we're looking at, say, specifically roles with teachers or with adults, we have to move into explaining that the role of the adult for a child is to protect them. The role of adults is to take care of them, and their behavior should be such that it is taking care of the child, looking out for their safety. So sometimes that means we have to do things a child doesn't like, but it still means we're a safe adult and we're doing it to keep them safe, even if they're angry about it or upset with us. However, we then have to also look at what would constitute something that would be behavior by an adult that is unsafe or that's inappropriate. That it doesn't have to go all the way to abuse behavior where there's sexual touching. It's about other things where adults are letting them break rules that their parents wouldn't let them break. Adults are asking them to keep secrets from their parents or their caregivers. They're creating relationships where they're the special person and it's a different relationship than they have with other kids their age, where they want to talk to them first thing in the morning and text them. They want to text them at night to say good night. So there's an increased frequency, which makes it inappropriate. And the method in which they're contacting the child and the casual nature makes it inappropriate, not so much that it moves to a place of being sexual. I think it's really important that that's actually where the prevention starts, is them starting to understand the context of safe behaviors of adults and what that means in respect to the role of the adult with them. So that if somebody is trying to be more friendly with them or meeting their emotional needs through children, wanting hugs from children because they feel sad and they're an adult, as opposed to the child being sad and needing a hug from an adult, which would make it appropriate with the child getting their needs met through an adult. An adult is using a child to meet their needs, borrowing money from the child, asking the child to console them, confiding in the child about their problems. those would be things that would be unsafe for children because they have to rely on adults for their security and for actually their safety. And so once they breach those boundaries and start to use children in that capacity, it creates a great deal of insecurity for children. So I think that those conversations are really, really important.
Thank you, Noni. And I can almost hear people madly taking notes. Just a reminder that these excellent answers from Lena, Linda, and Noni, these are being recorded, and that recording will be available. So just a reminder to take some of the pressure off you folks that are madly taking notes and capturing this incredible wisdom. Lena, you highlighted earlier a point that was made earlier in the presentation that many teachers go above and beyond. As an educator, how can I tell the difference between dedication and crossing professional boundaries? Especially, or essentially, how do you strike a balance between professionalism and approachability? What can you share from your lived experience with our participants?
I think the biggest thing that we have to remember here is that it's about being transparent, and it's about understanding where those boundaries are and having a knowledge of where they are and having discussions in schools and in boards so that all of our teachers have a good understanding of what is expected. Remembering the role, the place, the time of those roles, both in and out of school, is really critical as well. What we have found in school boards is that that sometimes those boundaries get blurred and not by intention. As I said earlier, it is the intention of teachers to do what they can to support the learning of kids, and that is their full learning, their growth and development. As I mentioned before, our teachers are coaches, and they play many different roles in school, and that's where those interactions are the result of an effort on teachers' part. And I think it was Linda that said, you know, if you're feeling uncomfortable, if there is a conversation that ensues, if you find yourself as a teacher in a situation where your gut's telling you it's not right, it's not. It's important to know that you can talk to somebody, you can talk to your principal, you can reach out to your human resources, you can reach out to your federation, your union as well. There's lots of support there, but being willing to address when you're uncomfortable and to make sure that you're clear and transparent in the follow-up.
Thank you, Lena. Noni, what are the signs that parents can look for in their kids, and even the teacher, if they suspect boundaries are being crossed?
So I think that I'm going to really generalize this, certainly, because it really is differential depending on the age of the children, typically what we see, or what type of misconduct or relationship, inappropriate relationship is ensuing. So I'm going to give a range, but typically if you have a young person, let's just say a youth, who may be engaging in an inappropriate relationship, or there's transgressions going on where there's more of an informal relationship that's starting with a teacher or an adult in the school, that starts to move to one that becomes more personal, where there's emotional transgressions going on. What that might feel like to a youth is great. That might feel to your youth, they might feel like they're having a special relationship with somebody, as opposed to you thinking that you might see something where a youth is scared or uncomfortable with that kind of relationship. That might not necessarily be what you see by the way in which the relationship is shaped by the adult. So it's important then to recognize that if you see changes in your child's behavior, where you're starting to see a change in a relationship, a special relationship, secrecy, not wanting to tell you things, being more distant, maybe in the relationship with their parents, because they're more feeling they're more connected to someone else and wanting to spend much more time with somebody at school. And you're just seeing a switch where the intensity seems off, right? The frequency of the time, the intensity of the emotions around that have shifted. Those are things that you might see. You also might see where we see more distressed response in children is once the relationship has stopped or the special attention has stopped. So you might see something like children who are incredibly depressed or seem very anxious or are having a very difficult time regulating their mood, difficult time concentrating. We see cognitive impacts, difficult time with memory. So you might see academic shifts for them and they're having trouble in their learning as a result of that. Troubles with sleeping, that can be impacted, and physical changes can happen too, biological changes. Or sometimes we see health impacts with more headaches, stomach aches, their autoimmune system seems to be lowered, so they seem to get sick more. Those are general things that we see when kids are distressed, not specifically tied to a relationship where they're having a harmful relationship with someone, but that can be an indication that your child is distressed or something is going on. So I would say that when those things are seen and you notice something different about your child, who, you know, and as parents, you know them the best. Also, teachers who have close relationships with kids, they know them very well as well. And if they're noticing a shift in a student where they go, you know, you just don't seem quite like yourself, really important to ask that, because for the kids that we work with and the individuals that we've worked with who've had these experiences, often what they've said is, you know, nobody asked me. So sometimes we don't directly just say, like, I notice you're not yourself. Is everything okay? And just let them know that they're seen, and opening up that door can be really helpful.
Thank you, Noni. And Lena, you had a good segue into this question. This is a question that we received from a few of our teacher candidates joining us tonight. I'm going to adapt the question a little to take into account the various scenarios that were presented. Sometimes in smaller communities, and larger ones too, in fact, teachers hold more than one role, and you did acknowledge that. For example, being a teacher and baseball coach for the community-run league, for example, and I could give many, many other examples. How does one maintain professional boundaries while fulfilling these multiple roles?
Certainly, Derek, and I would agree, it's not just rural communities. Teachers' roles do go beyond the classroom. As I mentioned before, it could be within the classroom, a community, a school play, even in the school, leader of a chess club or something. But in communities, small and large sometimes, they are also the community hockey coach. They maybe own a local summer camp, and they could employ students. And they could also be a relative or close family friend of the students that are in their very school or in their classroom. There are no different hats you get to take on and off as an educator. You're always accountable, whether it be in the class on Wednesday morning, at the arena on Saturday afternoon, or in a licensed restaurant, frankly, on a Thursday evening. An educator has no personal social media accounts. If we want to, start to go into that area, we're always bound to hold up the professional standards of practice and ethical standards, and abide by the professional boundaries and the advisories that we have, including the use of electronic communication and social media, as I just said. Our teachers are held to a very high standard of accountability inside and outside the classroom, and very much are respected members of our communities. I know as an educator in my personal life, going to the grocery store, I often run into students, parents, either from the past or present, and I'm still looked at as that educator at all times. And so it really is up to the teacher, up to us all as educators to uphold this position and act within the boundaries, and always be respecting the profession, really.
Thank you so much. Linda, please share with our participants any advice you have for teachers when it's the student or maybe even parent who encourages a relationship.
Okay, let me take my mute off. Derek, the advice on this one is actually quite clear. The responsibility always lies with the member to act in an appropriate manner and to maintain professional boundaries at all times. A student or a parent cannot assume responsibility or even absolve a member from a professional obligation to not engage in inappropriate relationships with students. If necessary, and we've mentioned it a few times this evening, consult with your employer or federation for advice on a specific situation, or even to express or document your concerns. But the responsibility lies with the member.
Thank you so much. This is one for all three of you, and I'll ask you to answer, and Noni, then Linda and Lena. We have several teacher candidates and teachers who have touched on our current online reality. I'm going to ask all three of you to take on this question, as I mentioned, and maybe share some additional thoughts. Just as an aside, we're running a little ahead of time, and we've had a number of questions come in live. So I'm going to put you on the hot seat a little bit and ask some additional questions too that are just fresh in the hopper, as it were. But this one first. COVID-19 has forced us to move our classrooms into our homes and online. What advice do you have for teachers to set and maintain boundaries in a home setting? Some teachers have wondered, how do you meet with a student one-on-one online? Is it wise to record the session? And Noni, if you can begin with that one, please.
Sure. I'm going to start with the first part of the question, because I know my colleagues are going to go more into the second parts of that question, around how do we move our classrooms and keep them appropriate online. And certainly we recognize here at the Canadian Centre what a challenge that must be, and really appreciate all the incredible work that's being done by teachers during this time. And I think you can look at it, we've been discussing this quite a bit as well, and you can look at it as your classroom is online, and so it's sort of the same as it would be within the classroom. What we recommend is that you are making sure the same as you would do in the classroom, that you are really making sure that your contact with kids is it's really focused to be goal oriented and outcome focused, tied to your work duties, tied to your roles. That you're keeping it formal, it's not something that's casual, and that it is a professional relationship. So maintaining those types of guidelines and boundaries as a framework online. As we know, sometimes coming online, it can make things feel more casual, especially for kids. They can start to become more casual. And so it's really important, I think, to help teachers as well as parents and students, for students to remember the role that they're in, that they are in a classroom, to maintain that professionalism. And again, around the times of day, that you're really confining it to times of the classroom day. And if you're going to be extending time outside of that, same as would happen within the school and the brick and mortar building, is that you would be making sure that's transparent and accountable for contact outside of work hours and duties. Thank you.
Thank you, Noni. Linda?
I would add, well, the advisory on professional boundaries does provide some advice on this topic. It includes advice around the use of employer-approved technology for communication, not using your personal email address, not using technology to start or to perpetuate a relationship outside of the appropriate teacher-student role. The college also has on its website the professional advisory on the use of electronic communication and social media that has some useful advice in there as well, and could be very useful, very informative. Regarding the one-on-one meetings and the recording of sessions, employers will have policies that will take into account a member's professional obligation or privacy concerns, adherence to any collective bargaining issues. So it would be really wise to consult with the specific employer as well as a federation representative regarding any of those concerns. As for the college's misconduct regulation, it doesn't specifically address one-on-one meetings or the recording of sessions.
Thank you, Linda. And Lena, anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree. The same parameters really apply to online learning, to online teaching and learning. It is important to define what communication will look like with students and parents and guardians in online learning and online communication. I think if you set those parameters ahead of time, then everyone's clear on that. The questions remain for an educator. Is the relationship one of teacher-student, caring adult-student? And is the communication happening, as Noni referred to, in the right space and the right time? The test for me is really if the teacher is asking themselves if they should record their time with students, should they be going forth? If you have to stop and ask yourself, should you be, then you probably shouldn't be. What would be the concern? And I would say, as we're over a year now into the world of remote learning, teachers are finding really creative ways to meet with students in pairs and groups, and bringing in co-teachers, support staff into conferences. Teacher conferencing has become, and I'm happy as an educator to see it. It certainly is one of the required aspects of assessment and evaluation under our Growing Success guideline. It really is amazing the structures that educators have learned to put in place to adhere to these professional boundaries, and to make sure that respect, trust, and integrity is maintained at all times. I'm glad Linda referred to the advisory on communication. We certainly in our board, and I know many of my colleagues in other boards, send that out as a reminder quite often, and especially in these times of remote learning. The more informal communication becomes, and we often think of online, or our students do, I would say more, it's a very informal way of communicating. And so when they feel it's informal, the greater chance for those professional boundaries to be blurred. In much the same way for the teacher in the small community that we talked about, that coaches on the weekends, that communication becomes less formalized as we stray from the traditional classroom and school. And we have to bring ourselves back to our role, and what is the space, place, and time that we're teaching. Our students need us to model good digital citizenship in communication and in social media, and in using all the online tools that continue to be available to us. And I think Linda mentioned it as well, referring all teachers to the guidelines set by their board. As members of leadership teams, we consider ministry directives, taking into consideration certainly OCT advisories and standards. And we as boards, we create guidelines for teaching and learning on all of these sorts of things. And so I would certainly point our educators back to those in their boards. And again, to echo something Linda said, our teacher unions and federations have a host of resources for their members that align with the standards of practice and the ethical standards set out by the college, and are always willing to support members. And we certainly work with our federations and unions as well in supporting the ongoing education of teachers in this realm.
Thank you, Lena. And this doesn't surprise me at all, because the three of you are excellent educators. And excellent educators not only help us students arrive at the answers, it also generates more excellent questions. And that's just what we have here. So Linda, I'll put you on the hot seat now, because I'm always making Noni go first. Could you just clarify the employer obligation to report? Just speak to that a little more. We've spoken a little bit, but one of the viewers asked for a little bit of clarification.
Absolutely. An employer, if an employer terminates, suspends, or restricts the duties of a college member for reasons of professional misconduct, they must notify the college in writing between 30 days. The employer also the employer also needs to notify the member that the report has been sent to the college. I'd also add that if an employee or a former employee is charged with a conviction of a criminal offense involving sexual conduct and minors, or an offense that in the opinion of the employer indicates that students may be at risk of harm or injury, they also need to report that, even if that employee no longer works for them. And if a member has engaged in conduct or taken any action that in the employer's opinion should be reviewed by a committee of the college, they should submit that report as well.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Lena, from your perspective, from the school board perspective, anything to add to what Linda said?
Not a whole lot. We really do work within those parameters with OCT, and we're very much aware of our timelines and about our duty to report and cooperate with the parameters set out. Most of it is very prescriptive. And boards have different, I think, processes, but we all very much follow these processes and the parameters in the interest of protecting our children.
Thank you, Lena. And the answers are very comprehensive, and Noni going last is hard, but do you have anything to add to those these additional comprehensive answers that Lena and Linda gave?
I know, I think those were wonderful, but I would just add one thing is that, what we see is that, as protective adults in the school of really people who are there and have dedicated their lives because they care so much about kids and want to see them thriving. I would say if you do notice somebody, even if you notice a colleague of yours or somebody in the school who is engaging with kids inappropriately, it's really important to act. Because this really is the professional boundaries and the misconduct side of the blurring of boundaries is the space for the protection of kids. And so it is a really critical time to make sure you bring that forward.
Thank you, Noni. And the next question is just a bit of a sum up of pieces that the video dealt with that you've alluded to also. And perhaps we'll start with you again, Noni. What are the best recommendations in regard to student and teacher interactions on social media?
What are the best recommendations?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of social media, I think you have to be really, really careful. What we're finding here at the center is we've had a 90% increase in reports to the center during COVID with kids who are finding themselves in really critical situations online where they're being harmed. And so I think as Lena said, we have to model for kids appropriate interactions, appropriate conduct online, and it really does get very, very blurry because we do have kids who are being targeted by individuals who are adults at times who are harming them. So we don't want to blur the line with them interacting with individuals who are safe adults who are in a professional relationship with them into a personal capacity to have social interaction, being on social media together. I think it's really important that people consider modeling for kids that as a role model for them, that I don't actually interact with you on my personal accounts. It would be inappropriate. That when I'm interacting with you, if it's going to be through social media, it's through the school account and through my professional account in which we interact that's transparent for all to be part of.
Thanks, Noni. And Linda, anything to add from your perspective?
That was quite well. I would really, like Noni said, really discourage any personal interactions, again, blurring that line, and to avoid normalizing for children that it's okay to have these interactions with social media, because if it's okay with this teacher and that teacher, is it okay with this other person that may not have such great intentions? So for the safety and then for the sake of our students, to really model that, just to echo what Noni just said.
So Elena, I can see you nodding your head. Would you like to comment further?
Really, I mean, we're all saying the same thing, I think, in certain ways, and adding a few things. I just think there's so many other ways to communicate with our kids and our families that the social media piece is just not even necessary. Keep it to the school day, keep it to the professional accounts for email. Most of our students in our boards have school accounts. We keep it to that, and but just always remember we're always wearing those professional hats. Even when we talk about personal social media accounts, there's still accounts where you're putting things out there on the web, and I think we always have to be conscious of educators that we are always those role models.
Thank you. And I'd just like to advise too, in light of these excellent questions, all of our public advisories, or professional advisories, are available on our website en français and in English. So I'd just like to remind everyone of that. This has been, what a wealth of information to reflect on a very serious topic, certainly. Your insights and thoughtful answers have certainly provided us with information that is so practical, usable, and I know from knowing the three of you, it's also deeply research-based too. I'd just like to thank you so much. I'm so glad there's a recording, because I know I'm going to look at it again, because there's so much excellent knowledge, excellent information and advice. But we're not quite done yet. So Chantal, I'm going to turn it over to you for some final words. Thank you again.
Merci Derek, Lena, Noni, Linda. C'était vraiment excellent comme présentation. Nous avons reçu plusieurs demandes.
Very much, Derek, Noni, Lena. We've received quite a lot
vous inviterai dans les quelques semaines à venir de vérifier notre site web pour trouver cette information. Aussi, la vidéo que nous avons partagée.
The video that we had at the very beginning is already shared on our YouTube channel, both in English and in French, so you can have a look at it. And now I would like to thank you all to have taken part in this webinar. And really, because you are much interested in the safety and the well-being of the Ontario kids, it's very important to have a safe and friendly learning environment for everyone. So thank you very much to all of you, and please take care of yourself.